Okay, everybody, David Fogel, CEO of the Symphonina Foundation, back with you again for another podcast. And today I've got Ada Witczyk, violinist and a fan of new Baroque music. Ada, how are you today?
Very good, thank you. How are you?
Oh, we're doing great here. We had a nice week, and it's getting to be the holiday time. Christmas is around the corner. 2025 is around the corner. And that means that you have a new album actually around the corner too. It's coming up in February. Let's start with your new album. We'll start in the middle and then work our way backwards. So, yeah, tell us
All
about
the
the new album.
exciting things.
Yeah.
Yes, that's so exciting. The new album is called New Baroque Sonatas. It is my second album, and it features 6 contemporary composers who've taken on a challenge on creating new music for Baroque instruments.
And so you perform on the album then.
Correct. I'm one of the 2 violinists. I'm very lucky to be joined by my former teacher and Grammy-nominated musician Simon Standage, and my friend harpsichordist Dominika Maszczyńska. And on this album, you have a selection of either 1 Baroque violin and harpsichord sonatas, or trio sonatas for 2 Baroque violins and harpsichord.
Great. So for listeners who may not know or be familiar with a harpsichord, now my parents were both musicians. My mom's still alive. My dad passed away in 2007, but my mom played harpsichord in the house. We had one in the house for him to play flute to typically. And so I'm a bit familiar with the harpsichord, and the main difference being that the strings are plucked rather than hit. But maybe you want to give us a little bit of an introduction to like the tone of the harpsichord and how it fits in the style of music that you are interested in recording.
Sure. So I would probably explain that as much as harpsichord is a predecessor or grandfather of a modern piano, so much so the Baroque violin is what a modern violin is based on. So nowadays, the instruments that we play on, they would have evolved over the years with the building of bigger concert halls and obviously instruments needing to be louder. But in the past, when Mr. Bach would have been composing for those instruments, because typically music would have been performed in churches, where nowadays we still try to record, as this is the place where the resonance is most natural and organic for them. So they use gut strings. In comparison to modern instruments, we have metal strings, and therefore the sound is very different. You have different set of colors. So giving an example of one of the pieces from an album where one of the composers, David Snow, he's been inspired by a French vintage kind of style cinema, and therefore creating a new piece that uses this very like more rough sound, which has also different colors, is very suitable. Therefore, I just think of Baroque instruments as another example, another tool for composers to create new range of colors.
It's interesting. How hard is it to find a Baroque violin these days?
It's a bit of a pickle. You might want,
It's easier to
you
find a
might,
pickle though. So how hard is it to find a Baroque violin?
definitely. You might want to go to one of the auction houses where they would be on sale. I found my instrument actually on one of the Tarisio auctions, which is quite popular in US, Germany, and UK. But also, probably most likely, you would just find one by word of mouth, hearing that somebody is selling one because they would have owned it, because their family would have owned one, and would be passed on, next generations.
Does anybody make new ones in that style, like a modern Baroque violin?
Yes, nowadays the luthiers, the instrument makers, they're fantastic. And it has been proven, even by some of the articles in the Strat, for example, we read very often that in competition with the old instruments, in blind experiments, they are very much so equal to the old instruments because the instrument makers are so talented that they can and they often do create some fantastic instruments based on, copies of those famous ones such as Stradivari or Guadagnini. So you may as well just go and ask somebody to make you one.
Yeah, okay, all right. So your album that's coming out, I believe it's February 28th, is New Baroque Sonatas, correct? They're all in sonata form?
Correct. Thank you. On all available streaming platforms such as Spotify, Amazon, Apple Music, and so on.
And I think you had mentioned to me that there were singles that you're going to release from the album a little bit before then. Is that correct too?
Yes, thank you so much. On Valentine's Day, on the 14th of February next year, the first single that will be released is this beautiful chaconne from Sonata by American-Italian composer Rafael Fusco. And Rafael has got this style of mixing different genres. And he's like a French overture inspired piece. He's using his language as a bit jazzy, a bit quirky, and this chaconne is just to die for. Like every time I listen to it, not because I'm playing, but because the piece itself, it's so heartwarming. It's just incredible.
And tell
And
me,
then,
I know, go ahead. I was going to say, I know we have a common contact who is one of your composers. That's Alexander Unseth, who was our 2023 Best Symphonina of the Year award winner. So he wrote for you too. And then if you want to talk about his composition and then the other ones that are on there, that would be great.
of course, so Alex's piece is full of life. I think that's the best way to describe it. His musical language is like sparkles just happening all around you, and he's been inspired by having a lot of siblings. So through his sonata called One of Seven, as he's one of the seven children in his household, we go through all sorts of musical arguments and making up and then, creating another big problem. And then everybody's ending up, feeling much better afterwards, having resolved all the musical issues in that piece. But it's definitely fantastic and full of energy.
That sounds like Alex to me too. Okay. And then what other pieces? Do you have five pieces on the album or what was it?
So we originally were actually planning to release five, but
Hmm.
because so many composers, and I'm being completely honest, have sent so many fantastic pieces, we couldn't decide. Therefore, we decided to release another six additional piece on an
Oh,
album,
nice. Uh-huh.
which is a movement from a sonata by British composer Andrew Wilson, and he's based his idea on one of the surviving sketches by British architect Sir John Vanbrugh. And the movement we recorded describes beautiful gardens in this castle, which is a typical English architecture filled with English gardens. You can just imagine, like, end of the day, sitting in a beautiful bench, and the day is ending. You're so relaxed. It's fantastic.
All sounds great. How did you? Well, first, let's go back a little bit. So when you were growing up, you must have started playing violin at an early age, right? So what? How did you come to pick it up? Were your families motivating you, or did you just see this violin and say that's for me?
I would probably best describe myself as a black sheep in a family where everybody's got those typical proper jobs of a doctor or IT worker. And so I was apparently inspired by this electric violin superstar of the 90s called Vanessa May.
Oh, okay.
And I wouldn't like want to stop talking about her. And years were passing by, and my family was hoping that would stop at some point. It didn't. And at that time, typically, very differently to these days, I went to music school as any other kid when I was 8, because that's when in the 90s we're starting the primary music school. And maybe about 6 years later, I then got into a music boarding school in a slightly bigger city where the education was much more rigorous and obviously musically oriented.
So I just was curious, Vanessa May, have you ever made contact with her?
Funnily enough, I know from music making, her father, but I've never kind of crossed paths with her. I might have been too shy to try to,
Well, we have
reach
to
out to my
we
hero.
have to see if we can facilitate something along those lines. Let me make a little note to myself. You never know how things go in this world, so that would be great. So
That'd
you
be
did music
great.
school, and then like, how did you decide? Like, okay, I'm going to really concentrate on the violin and maybe not branch out to some other instrument.
I want to thank my first violin teacher, who still is, a very dedicated pedagogue in that small city where I come from in Western Poland. He would spend multiple additional hours that he wasn't even paid for giving us additional lessons, driving us to music competitions, finding music festivals, and for all those kids that were interested in music. He was basically the creator of all those opportunities. And I think if it wasn't for his encouragement and all this time and passion that he had, I wouldn't have gone and therefore won all those competitions. That it was all thanks to him and obviously his efforts that I was trained for. So definitely he was a great influence.
It's wonderful to have people like that in your life, isn't it?
Definitely.
Yeah, not everybody's so fortunate, of course, but when we find those people who are just gems, it makes everything so much easier. So, okay, so you remember we were talking a little bit before we started the podcast about your performances and so forth. You performed all over in many prestigious places. What performances stand out for you as the most memorable?
Um, Probably not that far ago. I would definitely count performing solo next to Simon Stanley during English Haydn Festival in UK, or being part of BBC Proms, which obviously was a great event on its own, but being surrounded by this huge machine of fantastic music making, which obviously we've been running for so many years, it kind of makes you feel like all these years of practice were worth even just by being surrounded by so many wonderful musicians around you, just all this inspiration coming right at you.
Yeah, yeah. So okay, so when you have this idea for promoting new Baroque music, I think you have a series of competitions that you use in order to facilitate that. So let's talk a little bit about your inspiration for doing those competitions and what the next competition is.
So, sorry to bring it back, but when the COVID-19 pandemic hit us,
Mhm.
almost 5 years ago now, as you can imagine, I was 1 year after finishing my master's degree, being so excited. I had all these tours in my diary, including Carnegie Hall, Walt Disney Concert Hall. They've never happened because the pandemic wiped everything out of our diaries. Um, and after a few days with my partner, Nick Hardesty, we were really struggling just with the time on our hands because we are doers, we're extremely active in our music life. And an idea popped out just simply by not wanting to watch any more Netflix on our couch of why don't we just try to do something, even if it's in online space? So even just for us to have something to keep creating, just to keep motivate ourselves for practicing and doing something. And we really didn't expect that just advertising it on my social media, we would get responses from all over the world. And so composers who would have found that they would apply from, every single continent you can think of. And so I felt very responsible for all those people who spend so much of the time on creating fantastic music. So I tried to gather all our friends and a little fundraising too from our friends and family to give something back to them. As much as we never charged any fee, I figured it's still somebody's time that they are investing in creating the music. So we first started in finding a collaborator in a music publisher's house because I figured that would be worthwhile for somebody's music to be published in early stages of their career. And then one of my friends, who is a film director, who is very much into Baroque music, he agreed to, thankfully, create a music films out of all their winning compositions, and this is how it started. And we never have expected that 5 years later, that would be an annual thing that's now a registered charity. There will be 2 recorded albums. The last year we recorded 3 new Baroque violin concertos in a venue in central London. And so, yeah, that kind of just happened, if you can believe it.
It's all great.
Um,
Yeah.
if it wasn't for all this effort and talent, and honestly, not only the music of the winners, because there's so many other people whose music was really fantastic, but we didn't have capacity to record every single piece. So it's thanks to really to these composers who created this music that we just keep doing this because we really appreciate what they've done.
Yeah. So is this something that you are now invested in for the long term? Can we expect that this competition is going to run for the next 5, 10, 20, 30 years?
So having recorded all of those pieces from last 5 years, the goal for next year to make it even more worthwhile for those pieces that have been created is to bring them out to live audiences as much as we can.
Mhm.
So, personally, with my agent, we are trying to encourage music goers and venues to give those unknown pieces a chance. As you can imagine, sometimes it's not as easy, but that's the goal for next year to hopefully perform as many new pieces as we can in live performances.
That sounds good. Let me come back to my question. Should we expect that this competition series is going to continue for the foreseeable future? And do you enjoy doing it and want to keep doing it?
We definitely hope to, but as we are doing this year by year, and so that is the plan because quite a lot of our time is releasing of this album and obviously helping it even through conversation like with you right now to spread the word, then definitely personally my biggest passion at this stage is new music because if it's not even for the evidence of so much fantastic new works and creativity, if we, I believe, don't support young composers, the music will not develop. And as much as there is fantastic music from the past, we just will be stuck with what we know. And so I believe I just would like to encourage more musicians and more concert venues to just give it a chance because, as far as my experience is concerned, people really enjoy it because it's music that's relatable. It's created by people who live, these days. So there really is that connection, and the audience really loves it.
I think we have a very shared philosophy here at the Symphonina Foundation when it comes to creating new symphony music that people can hopefully enjoy for the next 200 years. Nothing against the classics, of course. We enjoy listening to those as well, and always will probably. But we do have great composers around the world, as you said. They can compose Baroque music, they can compose new symphony music, and other things too. And want to give them as many opportunities as we can. I did want to ask you if you've tried your hand at composing any Baroque pieces.
So I was trained in a full-on Eastern European education and later on in London in all of the aspects in composing and playing multiple instruments. But I just think there are so many much better people in creating the music than I use my experience in learning it, performing it, and hopefully publishing it and promoting it.
Yeah, there's of course the act of creation in creating a composition where you start with a blank piece of paper or a tablet in front of you or digital audio workstation, whatever you work on, and there's nothing on the page and you have to create something. But I want to make sure that for performers out there, we all get the credit as a performer of also having the creative part, which is interpreting what the composer has written and bringing the absolute most out of it in your own creative way, right? There's a lot of creation that goes in to being a performer as opposed to just reading what's on the page. And I think knowing what the composer has in mind or being able to communicate with them if they're alive can help, of course, guide you, but it's up to you and someone with your talent to figure out how to interpret what it is that you're performing and let the audience get the most out of it. Is there anything that you would say to other people who are getting into violin performance, maybe at let's say at a higher level, that would help them along that journey of interpreting what the composer is intending and things that can help them in relating to an audience from your experience?
I would definitely say that one of the most rewarding parts is that we can communicate with contemporary composers. And from my experience, they are all super open-minded, kind, and very happy to collaborate, very happy to accommodate smaller changes that suit one person more than another on instrument. So once you start working with them, it's almost as if the music is created for you that really touches your heart because you've chosen to play it, and together you can create like super a new experience that's never happened before. So as much as people might feel like, oh, I've been trained to play in one musical language or another, maybe from one genre or another, I think the almost as if like starting new sport or signing up for a gym, the most difficult part is to decide to do it.
It's true,
and
right?
then and then it just gets better because like what's better than being able to ask questions about the music to the person who's actually created it?
Yeah, when you're recording your recent compositions from other people on your album, for example, do they get to listen to your recording and work with you, or how does that work?
Yes, I definitely like to send a rough practice recordings, and I hope the composers don't mind the things are not quite yet there, but they get to have a say because I feel like it's their baby to start with. I spent much less time on recording it than they've spent on creating it. And so if a composer, for example, has one of the composers from new album lives in Argentina, then of course I'm going to send him an MP3 and therefore he can send me his notes. But those composers who live much closer, like with Rafael Fusco, for example, he even just traveled. He was so happy to come and have a listen during one of the rehearsals. He was so helpful that we were able to ask questions. He was able to change things that he thought might work, but in reality, he preferred something else. So it's a very collaborative like process.
I think that's great. I remember when I was working with Alex Sunseth and also Jordan Janosco on the album Advent at the Symphonina from this year. I got to do Zoom recordings with them and work Zoom sessions with them. So we go through as we're doing the mixing and have them fully participate in the decision making of what's going on and listen to each particular thing. Also, when we're recording, for example, with Budapest scoring for Jordan's work, Jordan was on the Zoom and we're listening via listen to Budapest perform live. And all that's great, but it's not quite the same as being in the same room. So, like when Chaitan Tierra was recording my piano part for Symphonina number two, my Symphony number two of the album from the previous year, I got to be at the piano recording, and he did it marvelously. Very one take in some cases, and two takes in maybe one case. The
Wow.
guy is amazing, but it's just a completely different experience as a composer when someone is performing and you're right there and you can not only hear it but really you can feel it. You can feel it physically and you can feel it emotionally in a different way, I think. So I certainly encourage other composers, if they have the opportunity, to participate in those recording sessions to the extent that the recording people will tolerate it. We don't want to be an annoyance to the people who are performing, of course, but I think it's a great synergy when it works very well. Ada, what else do you have
Absolutely.
planned for 2025? You got this album that's coming out. What can we expect for the rest of the year?
So from the things, because there's lots of things in making, obviously in talks and in progress, but those that I can already tell you about,
Yeah.
I'm very happy and surprised. I've been invited as a guest lecturer to university in Ireland in Limerick. um, and we'll be able to talk through not only the music side of things, but also collaborating with other arts, because there'll be lots of students who work in visual arts, in recording, in multimedia. So hopefully we'll be able to talk how we can do even more things together in more collaborative way. And there'll be also a festival of early music festival there, during which I will perform premiere works of lots of fantastic female composers that they're concentrating on this year. So I'm very excited.
When is that festival?
In March.
Okay, all right, coming up soon.
Yes,
Do you have a
very
lot of
exciting.
practice to do to prepare for that, or what is your preparation like? Actually, let
That's
me
a
ask a
great.
different question too, along the lines like, how much do you practice each day?
It really depends. It depends how much time I have, of course, because I also teach, so I have to spread my time between my own playing and my students. And there's a different amount of practice when you learn new piece. I like to start minimum 2 or 3 months before, so I feel like I have enough time without rush to give some thoughts, not only to the notes but the vision. I have time to get in touch with the composer because, as you know, I play lots of new music, so there's enough time for the communication. There is, of course, if you play chamber music, time when you rehearse, and that's super helpful to your own part because you see how it aligns with other voices. I would probably then slow down a little bit because you don't want to over practice. You want to be excited. You don't want to know the piece so well that it feels like you can't play it anymore. Because I believe you need to be honestly excited to share this feeling with the audience. So when you talk about this piece, the audience is like, wow, we can't wait to hear it. And so maybe 2 weeks before the concert itself, I'll then start practicing a bit more, maybe 3, 4 hours a day, depending on how wide the program is.
That's great. It's nice to be able to plan it like that and to be able to have that bigger picture in mind. You know, it reminds me a little bit. I was asked to play at my wife's sister's wedding piano this last year, and they wanted classical music, so I did Mozart Sonata 1 and I did 2 Clementi sonatinas. And like
Oh,
you,
lovely.
I started practicing them. Not that they weren't familiar to me when I was, learning piano as a young person, but they needed some refreshing. So I started practicing them just like you said, about 3 months, 4 months. I got into them ahead of time, and then just like you, not consciously, but I guess I had this idea in mind of not over practicing them. I too kind of let it go for a little bit, and then last 2 weeks really tried to polish them off. But along the way, it reminded me how much respect I think we all have to have for people who are like in the Budapest Scoring Orchestra who are going to perform something sight reading, no prep. Here's the music. Get the most out of it you can in the next 25 minutes to an hour and 15 minutes. That's a real talent too, And so I think let me ask the question along that line. Do you practice sight reading as well? Do you pick up new pieces and just say, I'll try this one for a day and then set it aside, never come back to it? Or do you kind of just focus on, I want to get immersed in a particular piece that I'm working on?
Well, first of all, those people you've mentioned, they are superstars. I've got some friends who work for London Symphony Orchestra, and they're absolutely from another planet. That's
Yep.
like a new kind of respect I have.
Yep.
During pre-COVID years, when I was still working quite a lot as an orchestra session musician, and as you mentioned, I would go and just play something on the day I've never seen before, but most often with the period orchestras, like the English concert or AAM. This is a different way of working. I feel like your concentration is on a completely different level. And obviously, the more you do this, the better you become. So I feel like since I came to UK in 2012, this is when my sight reading journey has started because there's a great tradition here in orchestra playing and people sight read at a speed of lightning. So I've been learning from my colleagues a lot. And then I think you just get better, especially when you have to, when you're faced into the fear of a performance in 3 hours, you make it work.
It's a challenge, and there are things that you can do to get better at it for sure. So for those of you who are aspiring musicians and professional musicians and want to do, I would encourage you not just to practice your exercises, but pick something that you haven't seen before, like truly haven't seen before, pick it up and run through it. Try to do it at a pace that's reasonable, as opposed to something that's
Absolutely.
unreasonable. But whatever it is for that piece for you. But I think it's an important part of being an overall good musician. Ada, for people who want to get in touch with you, what's the best way to do so?
Probably to find me, first of all, on my website, so www.adawitczyk.com, and also on social media, on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and all of those streaming platforms like Spotify, Amazon, Apple Music.
And since you do have a Polish last name, I'm going to help the audience with that spelling. So that's Ada and then WITCYZK.com. Did I get that right? I hope I got that right. Okay. ADAWITCYZK.com. Ada, it's been a pleasure. I wish you the best with your new album and all the other things we just talked about for the future and your competitions, and I'm sure we'll be in touch as time goes by.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.